Are you ready for a ghost story? I thought so. The story begins during the late 1920s during the construction of the Rush Rhees library. Pete Nicosia, a mason's helper and recent immigrant from Sicily, was helping on the construction site up in the tower when he stumbled and fell 150 feet to his death. Flash forward to the 1930s when the library is opened and students began to see things. The first sighting was in the fall of 1932 when a student named George Maloney was walking through the Eastman Quad on a foggy morning when he saw an Italian fellow who stopped and asked him if he had seen his boss, named James Conroy. Maloney learned about the legend of Pete Nicosia from a reference librarian working at the desk one night after him and his friend, Robert Metzdorf, snuck out onto the Rush Rhees tower and saw Pete's figure once again. Throughout his college career, George Maloney had several more eerie encounters with Pete Nicosia, until one night in 1934 he saw the figure and asked him, "Hey, have you ever heard of a man named Pete Nicosia?" The reply, "That's me, Pete Nicosia." And when Maloney asked about his fall, the figure said, "Oh right, 150 feet. Didn't hurt one bit." George Maloney later wrote about his encounters with Pete Nicosia in the 1934 March issue of Soapbox, the men's literary magazine at UR. More Pete sightings took place throughout the 1940s with another first-person encounter published in The Campus, predecessor to the Campus Times, by a student named Bob Weiss. And this is where things get a little murky. Weiss's story was inconsistent with previous accounts of other Pete sightings, and when the Campus Times reached out to him in the 90s for a story on Nicosia, Weiss stated that his story that he published in the 1940s was a figment of his imagination. Furthermore, University archivist Melissa Mead has been unable to find any records that would be evidence of Pete's existence or ultimately his death. So what do you believe? Have you seen Pete Nicosia stalking through the Rush Rhees stacks? Or do you think this was all a big ploy to get more students to read the campus newspapers? Either way, if you see a young Italian man wearing old-timey workers' clothing walking through the library at night, you may want to ask his name.